only 4 of us, and Mr. Botwright's broadcasting from the third world. So
I would say I am in the third world, but on a Godzilla theme, there is a house near me called Milfra, which is it seems this particular thing where retired couples, I'm fairly sure, kind of stick their names together. So there's like one called Jan Bry and another called Dave L. And I'm fairly sure there must be a Mildred and a Frank who named it. Either they hadn't seen Godzilla or it was the days before American Pie. But I love the idea of welcome to Milfra.
I'm quite close to the Grand Union Canal, and I'm delighted to say that there is a narrowboat parked up. It's been there for a day or two, and it's called the Wizard's Sleeve.
Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for the 21st of May 2014. I'm Phil Hinton. Thank you for joining us again, and we have a skeleton crew tonight. That's because it's sunny outside and everybody's made their excuses. So, assistant editor Steve Withers.
I think we've got another shark problem.
Games editor Mark Botwright.
What mouth?
And Ed Selley.
Drop it, it's a power line.
Gave too much away there.
Yeah, you gave the end of the movie away there, Ed. That's
I've never seen it. I've no idea in the context in which that line was on.
Oh, well, you've just given away the whole end of the movie. The spoilers, people. There you go.
Okay, so a film that was released in 1978.
Yes.
So if for longer than I've been alive, like me, you've avoided watching Jaws 2, I apologise. Apparently, I've just given away the ending. By the way, Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's dad as well. So,
I can't believe you just gave that one away.
If you think you can find somebody who wants to put money on the shark surviving the film, take him up on that offer.
let's stop it there, lads. We're on a high.
Oh, Christ.
Thank you and good night.
Yes, I think we're spent already. Anyway, let's do some hardware news. And first little bit of news is about Pioneer. And I was surprised when I read this. I don't see any references backing this up. This seems to be coming from one reporter, but rumours that Pioneer are going to move out of AV receivers and Blu-ray players, i.e. they're going to sell off their AV business to a third party and license it out. So you'd still see Pioneer Blu-ray players, but they wouldn't be built by Pioneer. So I'm not sure who picked up on this story. Was it you, Steve?
This is Ed, not me. And he claims that he's had confirmation from other sources.
I have. Yes, well, I mean, essentially, it first crops up on Andrew Everard's blog. He, late of What Hi-Fi magazine and Gramophone, is now a free agent. You're absolutely right, Phil, in so much as there's still not a huge amount of hard evidence on some of the larger websites, but I will point to him getting it bob on both with the original Kuro stories all the way back in 2008 and with Panasonic's exit from Plasma more recently. Part of the reason why I think it's a fairly good starting point as a piece of evidence is that if we don't forget his Mrs. Everard is Japanese, so he's able to get information that those of us who are less versed in kanji are unable to pick up on. But it makes fairly sobering reading, and the numbers are fairly verifiable. Effectively, after 2012, 2013, Pioneer turned over almost $1 billion in the AV category, which sounds pretty damn good, doesn't it? Except that the problem is that they actually then made less than $1 million operating profit on that, $984,000, which when you're dealing with 1.04 billion is pretty much within the realms of it being an accountancy error. So
they broke even, is that what you're saying?
There's not much in it, Steve. I mean, well, Steve, you've worked for organisations which dealt with big numbers. Let's face it, you're dealing with less than 1%.
Don't ask him. He lost billions.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were just rounding numbers. Don't worry, that's fine.
But it's more as I say, the problem is that what we're seeing here in Microcosm is something that I've been concerned about. I broached it periodically in podcasts. I know people find it very hard to tell when I'm actually taking anything seriously or just roaring along after a bit too much beer. But with AV equipment, AV amplifiers now have an impossibly short lifespan. They are expensive to license. They're cheaper to produce than they were, in so much as the cost of certain bits and bobs has actually improved lately. But they're not on sale for very long. There's normally a hell of a lot of stock kicking over after the product is officially discontinued, and it's just a money pit. And effectively, Pioneer is, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not a small company, but in terms of its different operating wings, it has less, the AV division has less spaces to hide in terms of looking a bit shabby or looking like it's not pulling its weight. And it, you know, as I say, we have to wait for absolute confirmation on this, but it wouldn't surprise me if they essentially farmed it out to other organizations to produce Pioneer branded equipment. I mean, to be clear, it doesn't necessarily mean that anything's going to get substantially worse. There's a large number of AV amplifiers from certain brands that we recognize to be Japanese house brands, which come from various Chinese factory sources. And, you know, I don't know how much of an operating secret it is, but we've issued some very positive AVForums recommended and badges to can you hear Fame in the background? Is that what's going on? There's a pupil downstairs. I don't know how much this microphone picks up. There's a pupil downstairs giving it absolutely 11 out of 10 Spinal Tap volume levels, singing Fame, which is putting me off ever so slightly.
Right, so before you go off, obviously valid points that you're making there. The other thing to bear in mind is that this is something that's been happening in the AV industry for quite a number of years now. I mean, if you buy a Philips branded product, you're not actually buying a Philips product in the AV world, especially TVs, because they're owned wholly now by TP Vision, who are a completely separate company, but they license the Philips brand, and everything that they release TV-wise is branded Philips. So it's not the first time that this has ever happened. It's something that goes on quite a bit in the AV industry, and maybe it's not something to get that worried about.
I don't think it's something to be hugely concerned about, no. Don't get me wrong, there are some unique facets to Pioneer amplifiers, and it will be interesting to see if, for instance, the Air Studio tie-in, Pioneer's own proprietary auto setup system, is it MCCAC? I can never remember how many C's in it. And many people, possibly myself included, I've often felt that it's produced more impressive and more natural sounding results than Odyssey has on occasions. So whether some of this bespoke and, you know, stuff that we've classically only seen with Pioneer, whether that would survive a transfer over is hard to say. And it must be said that, I don't know, I have a soft spot for Pioneer as an AV electronics manufacturer, as distinct from the televisions, a different case entirely as well. I mean, let's face it, they did produce a number of firsts. They are the first people to do an amp with auto setup, because MCCAC debuted before anybody else's, as best as I can know. I have to be corrected on that. First universal DVD players, the legendary DVD Laserdisc combo players, and two AV amplifiers in particular, one I owned and one I merely looked after for a bit, the AX3 and then the flagship AX10. They were great products. I have a huge soft spot for them. They rank among some of my favourite AV products I've spent any time with. And whether some of this identity will be lost if it's farmed out to some of the consultancy companies in China is hard to say. It might not. But yeah, there's a slight sense of nostalgia. But you know, in the cold hard light of day, if these figures are what they purport to be, you know, you can't run these things as a hobby.
No.
And if they aren't turning it over, then it just shouldn't. It can't be allowed to continue.
Yeah, well, I mean, just look at Plasma. We've now seen Plasma go because it doesn't make any financial sense to keep going with it.
No.
And that's, unfortunately, Steve, that's the world that we live in at the minute, and tough decisions have to be made. Companies need to make profits, and sometimes, as enthusiasts, you forget the fact that it's actually a business and that companies need to make profit. I mean, just going to the projectors forum, it's unbelievable how little people want to pay for projectors these days. You know what I mean? You know, how are they supposed to build something and make a profit when people don't seem to be prepared to spend any money on it because everybody's been fighting to get to the bottom?
I'll go one further than that, Phil. You know, you'd think when you review a projector that, for my money at least, offers exceptional value and performance. And the first comment someone makes is, well, clearly they're ripping us off then if they can make it that cheaply. As opposed to thinking maybe they're selling it at a loss, or certainly cutting margins very fine in order to make money, or rather in order to create a presence for themselves in a certain sector of the market. But yeah, the first comment was someone moaning about the fact that they were being ripped off by well, in this case, Sony. Gives you an idea that I think people, it is fair to say that consumer electronics products have got significantly cheaper over the last few years, obviously. And what you can buy now for a very limited outlay is significantly better than anything you could have bought with a very large outlay even 10 years ago. But I think it's created a slightly unrealistic expectation among people that things should be unbelievably cheap all the time and that they should work brilliantly and be incredibly cheap. I just don't think that's realistic. I think there comes a point where if you cut margins too finely, companies start to fall into trouble, a la Pioneer and Kuro, where clearly the margins weren't justifying their position in the marketplace, despite the quality of the television itself. And more recently, I guess Panasonic have been having similar problems with when it came to plasma themselves, and that's why they've moved out of that market. So, you know, if you cut margins too finely, there's no point doing the business. But if you cut the quality too much to get to a price point, then the product becomes rubbish. So, I think at the end of the day, you get what you pay for in this life, and people need to remember that sometimes.
But there's a further problem leading on from this, Steve, that it also becomes self-fulfilling. The two AV receivers that you and I covered last month, you did the 87, I did the 57. You shop around and you can already find them substantively less than their list price from various retailers. Admittedly, you know, the Pioneer announced, made tentative announcement about what may be the last lineup of their own AV receivers for next year. But the problem is that then within that, because of the relentless specification changes, the depreciation on AV electronics is just horrendous. And it does then lead on to the fact that I emphasize that people wouldn't, I can understand why people don't want to spend a huge amount, because it's going to be worth buttons. When you see speakers, they don't suffer from anything like the same problem, because their obsolescence periods is exponentially longer. But we keep having the next big thing, the next big spec point that we must have, and it renders the older equipment utterly valueless, which in turn means that no one wants to spend out on it in the first place. It's
a very good point, because I'm just thinking, going back, let me just work this out, because I'm now in my 40s and it takes me a while to work things out now. But it's a good point you make. You go back to the mid-90s, I remember spending about £10,000 in one go, and that was on the first Dolby Digital receiver, amplifier from Yamaha, Pioneer Blu-ray player, full set of speakers, and a Pioneer rear projection 16:9 TV that was like a piano. And I held on to that equipment for 5 years, 6 years, and I lost very little money on it when it came to selling it on again. I had a Rel Storm subwoofer in there. I lost very little money when it came to selling it on again, because it was all still pretty relevant stuff, even 5 years on from when I bought it. Nowadays, like you say, you buy something and within 2 or 3 months it's obsolete. The next model's being drawn up and you know it's coming because it's now got a additional Spotify app, or you can stream this to it, or it now has a new HDMI protocol. It is getting a bit silly, isn't it, guys? I mean, Mark, you haven't said much yet. What's your thoughts on it?
I think with regards to, say, like audio equipment not having the same obsolescence, I think that started to perhaps not be as true when everything started to amalgamate into, one device to rule them all. So as soon as, should we say, people started quibbling about how many HDMI ins you actually had on the back of a receiver or something like that, it just seemed like it's moving away from the idea of the audio and into how much can you fit, how many, should we say, how can you streamline everything down through one device?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was the move to the big media hub. exercise for AV receivers, and it must be said those latest generation of AV receivers, Pioneer, Yamaha, etc., do that magnificently. I mean, obviously, the problem is that 4K casts a long shadow here as well. HDMI 2 is a requirement. Obviously, 4K pass-through at the bare minimum with 4K scaling and processing. These are all requirements. And obviously, the nature of how 4K broadcast is being received means that if there's any trick sound formats to go with it, as I understand it, the audio return channel standard for HDMI at the moment is limited to Dolby Digital or DTS as a maximum. So if we start, I mean, obviously we're looking a way down the road, but I dare say that someone's going to announce it sooner or later. If someone starts bundling bigger soundtracks and the only way to receive 4K content remains through things like your Netflix app and stuff like that on your 4K television, we then need to beef up the audio return channel, and the standard for that is still vaporware, and that's another point of obsolescence for these AV receivers. And you just look out into the future and it's just one long progression of seemingly inconsequential but actually nonetheless usefully significant bits of specification that keep being churned out and added at annual intervals, and I don't see any prospect for it improving. I mean, it's a sort of hobby horse of mine. I mean, I do think the only answer at any sensible price point, and if indeed I was spending doing what you did in the 90s, Phil, and spending out a significant amount on my own, the only thing I could do to stop me from just developing a serious migraine would be to buy a decent multi-channel power amplifier and then just bolt relatively inexpensive AV receivers with pre-outs onto it, chopping and changing those and not losing out as much. But that's not been part of Pioneer's core business for some time, so it's not necessarily an art, and it also, it's a bit more of a tough sell to the public when they, to spend out that much money the first time round, explaining that they don't have to spend it out the next couple of times. Some people might go for it, some people might not. Don't get me wrong. For anyone listening and is seriously worried, to be very clear on this, I don't want to name names, but 2 Japanese manufacturers have already stopped in-house development of AV products, and they did so many, many years ago, and nobody seems too bothered or noticed the change. So don't get too het up about it, but it will be interesting to see, and it will be interesting to see if anyone follows suit in the months to come.
Okay, cool. So we alluded to it, Steve, during that conversation there, but you have had what seems to be the bargain of the year when it comes to projectors. Good quality projection at really low prices with Sony's HW40.
Yeah, I mean, when this was announced a couple of months ago, it raised a few eyebrows, I think, amongst projector enthusiasts, because they were thinking, hang on, it looks on the spec sheets at least to be very similar to the HW55, with the exception of a lack of a dynamic iris, and yet it was nearly £1,000 cheaper. It's £1,850, and the HW55 was retailing for around £2,800. Although that does also include 2 pairs of 3D glasses. So when I got it in for review, I put it on, set it up, and I was immediately thinking, this looks really good. This looks basically the same as, I wasn't doing a side-by-side comparison, but from memory, this looks pretty much the same as the HW55. The same chassis, the same menu systems, the same features apart from the dynamic iris. And then once I got into actually testing it, the accuracy out of the box was superb. Really, really impressive levels of accuracy in terms of grayscale and the color gamut. It's got a CMS, it's got a 2.1 balance control. You can get to a reference level. It was nicely detailed. To nice natural looking images, good motion handling. You start to think, well, this is really, really impressive. And once I started to watch stuff on it, I realized that there is obviously going to be a certain difference in terms of the perceived black levels between the HW55 and the HW40 because of the lack of a dynamic iris. And also it has a manual control, so you can close the iris down, which you can't do on the 40. But otherwise, I was looking and thinking, this is a really, really good picture, and for that kind of money, this is a really, looking at it, I couldn't see where Sony had been cutting the corners to get down to that price point. In terms of performance and build quality and everything else, it looks superb. So as far as I'm concerned, absolute best buy. In terms of performance and features and price, no question about it in my book. It sets a new standard really for that sort of £1,500 to £2,000 price bracket. And that's what I said in the review. And then obviously people started coming in going like, well, that means they must be ripping us off on the 55 then. No, not necessarily. And then someone else going, well, why does everyone think that £1,850 is so cheap when that would be a lot of money for a TV? Yeah, but it's a different kind of market. They don't make anywhere near the numbers of projectors that they'll make for TV. So you haven't got the same kind of economies of scale. I think for a quality projector, that's a bloody good price.
Economies of scale, you hit, I think, the nail on the head there. Sony are after this market. It seems they're desperate for the consumer projector market, Steve. You just have to look at the VW500 to see that that's the case. I mean, that is a projector there which is based on another model which cost nearly £20,000. And you're looking at a projector there that's £8,000. Yeah. A 4K projector. There's no way that they can manufacture that in enough numbers to be making any money on that projector that I can see. So they're obviously going with a loss leader there because they want to be the one in the market to fight off the competition. Because the less competition you have, then the more control you have on setting your prices and setting your market area. And that definitely looks like what Sony are attempting to do there. They're trying to force out, and it's not very difficult. When you look at the projector market, there's not a lot of big hitters left in there now. It looks like they're trying to take over that market.
Yeah, absolutely right, Phil. If you look at Sony's position now in terms of their product range, they've got the HW40, £1,800. So that's the sort of, not exactly ultra budget, but certainly what I would personally class as a budget projector. Then you've got the HW55, £2,500 to £3,000 price range. So that's going head to head with, well, actually these days it's only going to be going head to head with the Epson TW9200 because JVC have stopped making the X35 now, will be very soon. So they're kind of getting that to themselves a little bit now. Then you go up to the VW500, so that's going head to head with the JVC X700, I guess. But as you point out, it's the only native 4K projector in that price range. And then they've got the sort of high-end 1100 at £17,000. That's taking business away from the people who make the sort of, the £20,000-30,000 3-chip DLPs. It's a very strong position. It's a risky strategy because I mean, obviously they're betting the farm on a lot of this technology and having a dominant position in the projector market. But certainly right now they're in a strong position, I think, because if you look at certain areas, there's no one to compete with them really. And I guess that's partly because they've got the economies of scale. They've also obviously got they make projectors for the cinema, so they've got that expertise that they can bring into the consumer market. So from the point of view of, and I'm not talking about projectors, obviously Epson or BenQ, they make a lot of projectors, but they make mostly data grade projectors, and they make, we're talking about home cinema enthusiast projectors. The market has been between Sony and JVC with a little bit of Epson on the side. Panasonic disappeared. I mean, but they can come back at any point. I mean, they've got a huge professional projection. Exactly, yeah. I mean, I'm surprised that they have just sort of disappeared for the last couple of years, given that they
But then again, Steve, like we said right at the very start of this podcast, if it's not making money and there's no commercial sense, why bother?
Be interesting to see what JVC do next.
Yeah,
because clearly that's who Sony have positioned themselves against, aren't they, in the moment?
And the most surprising thing here is that again, JVC have a professional department. They had a 4K projector out in 2008.
It was the size of a car, though.
It is the size of a car, but they've had that technology for a long time. Yet they seem to be giving up this market space to Sony, and that says to me that there's no money in it, basically.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's two reasons. The market, I don't know what the margins are like, but my guess is that they're pretty fine at times in the objective market. And also the cost of R&D, I mean, God knows how much it cost Sony and how long it took them to take a cinema projector, 4K cinema projector that they make and cram that into the VW1000 that came out over 2 years ago now. That was an amazing achievement in itself. And for £17,000, frankly, they couldn't be making much money on that either, I'd have thought, because given that you'd be paying hundreds of thousands of pounds for the cinema equivalent. It's I think it's two factors, Phil. I think it's probably competitive market, tight margins, and the cost of R&D.
It does touch on what we started the podcast with, Ed. And given that you used to work in that other side of the business, the dark side, what's your thoughts on it?
Well, ultimately, projectors are a slightly alien territory for me. To be clear, I have less exposure to them. When it boils down to it, I don't know what the core costs are, and I don't know how much you might be able to farm out and do externally, if you will, and have pre-developed for you. It does strike me as actually quite an interesting category to try and grab and hold dominant market share on, because I do think that if the economies of scale reach a certain point for you with projectors, I do think it's an area where you could actually make meaningful margin, and actually it could be worth doing. And whether someone at Sony has crunched the numbers and thought, yeah, what's there to lose, especially as you say, with the market being diminished, with competition coming from let's face it, we've got Sim2 making beautiful, technologically interesting, but not that desperately advanced projectors. You've got JVC ploughing their own furrow and not necessarily as quick on the uptake for 4K. I think, this could be Sony's. It could be a two-pronged, and I have to stress this is pure conjecture. Whether they're hoping for both a halo effect on their other vision products, and we all know, let's face it, nobody's making serious money on televisions, and at the same time hoping to own that niche itself and try and make that a profitable little enclave. I don't know. I mean, if they've got the resources and they've costed it out and the market doesn't do any significant changes, who knows? It might be a very, very clever move indeed. But manufacturers have tried this elsewhere. 2008, 2009. Onkyo threw everything, including the kitchen sink and most of the other fittings and fixtures, at the AV receiver market in the UK and achieved enormous market share, and retained quite and have never they've maintained a presence since then that they never really had before that point. So you could argue that it's been worth it for them, although I don't know if it's actually translated into actually any meaningful profit. So we've seen that there's precedent for it. It might work, it might not. So yeah, we'll play it by ear, I think, or in this case, as it's a projector, we'll play it by sight.
Okay, so if you've got any views on the subjects that we've covered in the hardware section, then leave us your thoughts underneath the podcast in the podcast forum, or send us an email to podcast@avforums.com. Before we wrap up on hardware, upcoming reviews, Steve?
I've got the Samsung H7000, which is their sort of second tier full HD TV coming for review. And Mark will be taking a look at the HU7500, which is their second tier 4K TV, which you'll be getting at the end of this week, I believe.
Okay, so that's what's coming up for review later this week. And we'll be back in a sec with games news. Okay, so games news. You published a games podcast with hardly any news in it because there wasn't any news. And as soon as you published it, Mark, the floodgates opened.
Yeah, Murphy's Law. As soon as, in fact, I think it was actually between the time of recording and it actually being published that Microsoft decided to announce that they were nixing the Kinect or Kinect 2.0 on the Xbox One. So it will lower the price. There'll be a new SKU out in, I think it's June, for £350. So it brings it perfectly in line with the PlayStation 4. And yeah, everything, it seems like Microsoft are trying to get everything in order pre-E3 because they had a fairly horrendous time last year with people continually asking questions about the product and about focusing not so much on games, but about problems with, the paywall for media services, things like that, and the fact that this Kinect was being kind of foisted upon people and people weren't really signing up to the vision of that. And now it's pretty much all changed. Microsoft are ditching the paywall for media services, so Netflix and Hulu and stuff like that. You no longer will have to have a gold membership. I think that's on Xbox One and Xbox 360. They're also changing Games with Gold program. So on the Xbox One, they're bringing it in line with the PlayStation Plus service because the criticism has always been that they haven't had comparable quality of games. And Microsoft will always argue that their service differs in so much as it's not strictly speaking a subscription service. When you download a game with the Games with Gold program, that's yours to keep, whereas with PlayStation Plus you have to continually subscribe. However, now that you've got these new consoles where you're assuming that most people will be subscribing anyway, it means they can offer far better quality games, I think, in the end. And that will start on the Xbox One in June. And yeah, basically it seems like it's all change at Microsoft HQ, and this all happens straight after we'd recorded the podcast.
You know, Microsoft wanted this new console to be the future, with all these fancy new features that they were going to have on there, with it being online all the time, the Kinect and all the rest of it. And basically what we've ended up with is a games console.
Yes. Basically, it's a question of, I think perhaps a lot of people have looked at the, Don Matrick, who left fairly soon after the debacle of the One actually kind of gaining so much flack. I think he went off to Zynga. And slowly they've dismantled that vision. You would have been a fool not to see that Kinect finally would be properly unplugged. I mean, as soon as they said that you could actually turn it off, or as soon as you could then unplug it, then surely it's no longer an integral part of the system.
So why do they claim that it was then, Mark? Because clearly it isn't.
Well, because it was as part of the original vision. As part of the original vision of an online, always online console, of something that follows almost what's the word? Almost not service based. Well, like it has to validate, the software to make sure, for DRM purposes. So it's always pinging back to Microsoft HQ. It was the idea of an always connected console. It was the idea of something that, you could give voice commands to, that it would be. They had the better quality camera, so therefore they would have something there that, brought people more in line with, say, the cutting edge of smart TV features, those kind of things.
The facial recognition stuff, I mean, the demo stuff I saw, that was absolutely fantastic.
It reads heart rates, things like that.
Yeah, they had a room with no lights on, yet it could still tell who was who in the room. Yeah,
I mean, it's fantastic that I pick up, the Xbox One controller, and it signs me in automatically. It sees my face. It sees when I put it down and walk out the room. That to me, it's a brilliant feature. However, the question is, was it worth the extra money? And in a strange way, it's weird how things have turned out, because the almost unwritten story about all this was that Sony chucked their own camera under the bus in the same manner. Pre-E3, they were planning on releasing the PS4, by all accounts, with a camera, and it would have come out at $399. And Microsoft's console with a better quality camera at $429 doesn't look that bad. Okay, there's a mismatch in a lot of launch game resolutions and the like, but you're still in the same ballpark. As soon as Sony dispensed with their PlayStation camera, all of a sudden they could hit that 350 point mark, and then you've got an £80 difference to spend on an underpowered console, the less powerful console, just with that camera. And the problem was they didn't have enough content there. What you needed from day one was to say, this is why we've bundled it here. This is why you've spent all that extra money on it. And beyond, people saying it's got that kind of Knight Rider quality. I'm talking to my console. That wears off after about a week. And controlling Netflix by, voice control is great. But then, you realize that you do sound a little bit odd, kind of late at night shouting at your console. And then you just buy a media remote.
Mark, we could have told you all that years ago from all the crappy stuff that was on TVs.
Yeah, exactly. But it's strange that, in fact, perhaps by Sony not having as much content or as much stuff planned for it that they could dispense with their camera sooner, almost put them in a better position. But both manufacturers just hadn't shown enough. They hadn't shown enough of what they were supposed to be used for. They've fallen into that kind of horrible mire of the companies chasing what Nintendo managed to grasp, which was motion control market, which struck at a particular point, and then the market expanded exponentially, and everyone said, this it's worth X more billion. But really, those people who bought Wii Fit, those people who were kind of dancing along with controllers in their hand, most of those people have migrated to tapping at tablets and their phones and the like, and that market's just gone.
Yeah. I think you're right there, and it is kind of sad to see that they could have pushed so much more, but there is this sort of sense looking back at it now that perhaps it was all a little bit rushed and really ill prepared, and they were trying to outdo each other. And whereas if they just spent the time R&D and getting stuff right, and like you say, have the correct titles on launch, it could have been so much better.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, there are certain things in that original blueprint for the Xbox One and for the PS4, which sounds very much like it was perhaps at least another maybe year away. If they launch with those kind of things, if they launch with something that says, this is unlike a game you've played before, and the camera, is so integral to the experience. But, these were all things that, they were touted with the original Kinect. There was this, it was called Project Milo, which Peter Molyneux, the famous British, games designer, showed, which, this figure that you could actually talk to on camera. And, there was lots of kind of ideas about he would recognize if you were sad or happy, or he would notice if you changed clothes and these kind of things. And it just wasn't possible with the technology at the time. And then it seems like, well, they improved the technology, but then almost all those people who were visionary enough to have ideas, perhaps, once bitten, twice shy, they just decided, well, no, it's not worth following that path. And now the sad fact is that there are developers who had things they were planning to do, people who've, games that are fully in development now, they've gone too far to turn around, and their market is just going to be kneecapped, because as soon as the Xbox One goes to £350 price point, you can imagine there will be bundles, there will be more retailers trying to vying to put together, attractive bundles coming up to Christmas. And so the kind of percentage of people who've got Kinect and will still have it plugged in is going to be pretty minute.
Mark, do you think that, following on from the long and involved conversation we just had about AV, do you think that there's also a margin call on this as well, that nixing Kinect actually has more of an effect, that it may be one of the more expensive bits of the thing to put together?
Oh, it was.
This new price point also offers them actually better margin on the product, because I know that this matters to Microsoft and has always mattered to Microsoft. Presumably, if they're making more money doing it that way around as well, then they're not going to fight that for too long.
Yeah, well, there was, there have been various breakdowns of the console price, and a significant amount of the Xbox One was that Kinect camera. It was a very nifty piece of technology. And ultimately, yeah, it does seem to be all about margins. And should we say, it's also the fact that when they're not selling as much and they're launching in fewer territories than Sony, they can't afford not to be in front in at least, the US. They want to be in front in the US, and the UK was fairly, kind of positive towards Microsoft branded consoles all along. And if they don't hit those markets, then they really are kind of a minority console.
I mean, it must be said on a level of speaking as a fat person, the whole prospect of leaping around, and if I want to do exercise, I will reluctantly go off and do exercise. I do computer games to be sedentary. I've never liked the Wii for this reason. Yeah, it's one of those things where I could have envisaged buying an Xbox One, and it's just, I'd have just looked at it, wondered where on earth I put it, and just probably left it underneath the cat bed somewhere and just.
Well, the good news. Well, there is a small silver lining there, which is now that Kinect will be sold separately, if you have one, I'm assuming that you should be able to actually trade it in. So if you're one of those people who disconnected it straight from the start, that now actually has some kind of value to people who won't have one.
Yeah, that's true. You could go trade it in for a game or two.
Yeah, exactly.
So Mark, just before E3 then, what's the sort of state of the union as far as the Xbox One and PS4 go? Who's kind of in the lead?
Well, it's Sony, simply because they've launched in so many different territories, and Microsoft can't get a foothold in Japan. So Sony have said that I think they've actually got sales figures out there. Microsoft have generally kind of hedged around units shipped. So therefore, you have no idea how many are sitting in warehouses and sitting kind of in retailers and the like. However, there is this kind of general sense that Microsoft have just announced when there's going to be a new Halo 5 for autumn 2015, and there's a rumor that there's going to be a Halo collection remastered 1 to 4. So, those are the kind of things that, for a £350 console, and one that might be, shall we say, looking closer to the £300 mark once something gets bundled in around the holiday season, that all of a sudden becomes very tempting, particularly to the UK market.
And just before we go on, E3, when is it, and what should people be looking out for?
Hang on, when there? Google.
You know what it is?
Seriously,
Yeah,
Mark? You're the games editor. Come on, you should know when E3 is.
I know when it is.
It's when then?
It's June. It's June.
It's June. He's waiting on his browser opening. Come on.
It's before. Oh God, no, not 2013.
Yeah, we've got a movies editor that doesn't watch movies. A games editor that doesn't know when the biggest trade show.
A news editor doesn't know what's going on in the news.
Oh, that's why I was searching for 2013. Hang on.
It doesn't know what year it is.
This is Windows 7.
Oh, we run such a tight ship.
Hang on. Yeah, no, I knew it was right. I just didn't want to say anything and appear the fool. It's June the 10th to the 12th.
Yeah, that worked.
Yeah. How's that working out for you, Mark?
Good luck with that.
June the 10th, you said.
June the 10th till the 12th.
Till the 12th, okay. And you're obviously going to pick up on the stuff there for the podcast next month then?
Yeah, we're hoping to be able to try and record it literally as the show finishes, so we kind of digested everything and then try and get it edited and turned around in a day, so we can actually get proper reactions. So
you're
the
not
news
out
doesn't.
of date in 5 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Would be nice.
So there you go, people. You had it here first. The first games podcast is probably worth you listening to. Will be next month, according to Mark.
Oh. That
Kick
hurts.
him whilst he's down. Why don't you?
Yeah, you didn't even know the date at E3. Come on.
And there
He
was
did.
me. Yeah, I did.
I'll take his word from him. He did. He just made the mistake of checking it really badly.
And stupidly thought you'd cut that bit out.
Yeah.
But we know you're going to leave it in all of its excruciating glory, aren't you?
This is all getting left in. You can guarantee that.
You always do it to me. Whenever I cock up, you always leave it in.
And I was planning to comment on Godzilla as well.
Wow.
Have you watched Godzilla?
No, but I've got something to say about
Yeah.
complete non sequitur.
Okay, well, let's wrap up on the games bit, play a little bit of music, and we'll come back with the movie news.
That makes you sound like a local radio DJ. Let's
A message
play,
from our sponsor.
let's play Radar
Yeah,
Love by Golden Earring.
Let's not do the sponsor bit. There was a funny tweet today, and I'm going to mention the guy because I did retweet him. It's Scott Armour. Thanks very much. He made me laugh this morning. He basically said, tried out at Netflix UK today after the almost shameless promotion on the AVForums podcast. I appear to be hooked on House of Cards.
Phil, we got almost to the end of this podcast without you mentioning the N-word. Below it, didn't you?
Sorry, mentioned the N-word.
Yeah, not the one you're thinking of, Jeremy Clarkson.
Right, swiftly, moving on. Let's not go there, Ed. What's... No, we're not going there. What's at the cinema, Steve?
This week we have Godzilla. I'm going to have to start this off by saying that
And Godzuki.
What?
This lack of nicotine is beginning to get to you, isn't it?
Yeah,
And
clearly.
don't tell me that you're not chuffing glue just to make up some of the difference.
I don't get it.
Yeah, nor do I.
Do you not remember? It's Godzilla and Godzuki. You never watched that when you were a kid? The cartoon?
I've got no interest in Godzilla whatsoever. I've never seen any of the Japanese films. I have seen the 1998 version, which everyone hated because they changed the look of Godzilla, and I quite enjoyed it because I have no interest in Godzilla, therefore I couldn't have given a monkeys that they changed what Godzilla looked like. In this film, they don't. They actually do stay pretty faithful to the guy in a suit look from the Japanese films, which is one of the big problems I got with it. It looks bloody ridiculous. Anyway, so they've hired Gareth Edwards to direct it, who previously made the ultra-low budget Monsters, which was a very good film. I really enjoyed. I don't know. That felt a bit like stunt casting. I think, oh god, they've hired the guy that made Monsters to make a remake of Godzilla. In fairness to him, he handles the 160 million budget really well and makes a genuinely decent stab at making a Godzilla film. I think he manages to stay faithful to the original Japanese movies to a degree, which will keep the sort of diehard purists happy and the fanboys, whilst also trying to make a sort of semi-serious, interesting movie, sort of focusing on the human drama in taking place whilst all this monster action is going on. Unfortunately, ultimately, no matter how good the film might be or may have been, or how good some of the action set pieces are, it's still about a 350-foot tall monster who eats radioactivity and breathes fire and attacks other monsters. And I just found it ultimately silly because I just don't have an interest in Godzilla and I think it's stupid. And I appreciate the original Japanese film in 1954 was very much post-Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and it was about the concerns of nuclear weapons and the effects of pollution, of fallout and radiation. I get all that, and that's fine. And in the context of the film, that's fine. And they do quite a clever thing at the beginning of this where they suggest in sort of newsreel type footage that the nuclear test 1954 are actually trying to kill Godzilla. And the original Japanese movie is inspired by those events. So, in fact, the guy in the suit looks a bit like the monster in this film because it was being based upon descriptions of it at the time, which is kind of clever. And then it moves into the story itself, and you've got Bryan Cranston from Breaking Bad, and you've got Juliette Binoche, who are a couple with a young child, who work at a nuclear facility in Japan, which, again, ain't going to happen. You would never have a Westerner working at a Japanese nuclear facility. But anyway, there's an accident, and then the film then jumps forward from this accident 15 years before to the modern day where the young boy is now grown up to be a soldier, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, who's a bomb disposal expert in the US Marines. The accident is kind of hushed up by the government. It actually was involved monsters, but they try and pretend it's it's an earthquake, something like that. And obviously, it's kind of slightly influenced by what's the Japanese nuclear power plant that got hit by that?
Fukushima.
Fukushima.
Yes. Fukushima. They even give it a name similar to Fukushima, actually. Obviously, in this case, it's something more monster related. And then it kind of kicks off by monsters turn up, and then Godzilla turns up. They actually do Gareth Evans does a really good job of keeping the monster, or Godzilla specifically, kind of teasing you with him for about the first hour before he shows up in all of his glory. And some of the action set pieces are really superb, absolutely stunning. He does a great job of handling a massive budget film. And I think it's a well-made movie, and I think the actors, it's got a great cast. Got Ken Watanabe in it, who's probably only there because he can say Gojira, which is the original Japanese title. And they got Sally Hawkins, Bryan Cranston, as I've said, Juliette Binoche, and Elizabeth Olsen as well. In a fairly thankless part as the wife of Aaron Taylor Johnson, who basically spends most of the time in peril. But yeah, I mean, it's got lots of things about it that I really liked. I think Kaz was very disappointed in his review. I think he expected more. I went in with no expectations whatsoever.
I've been reading Twitter all weekend, and it's been very 50-50 split right down the middle.
Yeah, I think if you're like Kaz and you expected some sort of masterpiece, you're going to be disappointed. If you're like me and you couldn't get monkeys, went along for 2 hours of entertainment, I thought it was pretty good. I mean, it's still a stupid film about a giant monster, but it's well made. It's got some good set pieces and good performances, and therefore, I think it is a solid 7.
And it's made 400 million worldwide over the weekend.
Yeah,
which is better than a kick in the bollocks.
I must have said back already.
What you've described there, Steve, it's a major gripe of mine about how we're dealing with modern monster films. That we have two competing issues. We want to ground the existence of a 300-foot tall radioactive fire-breathing thing in some sort of real, historical context. And if that's not enough, more often than not, we also want to put in some modern environmental message at the same time. One of the things I quite liked about Pacific Rim is that it decided to ignore all this. It's like, yeah, these things are coming through a hole in the Pacific Ocean. Deal with it. It got the exposition as to why there were 5,000-ton monsters appearing at sea out of the way in about 25 seconds.
Yeah.
It didn't need to set up their existence. And reading both Kaz's review and what you've been saying there, this agonizing attempt to place context around a monster. You know, it's like someone's going to tell me next that they're going to do a Mothra spin-off, and he's a problem due to, I don't know, global warming or something, and it's just okay. There are serious issues. We want to talk about climate change. You go and talk about climate change, but don't mess about with the monster movie. The monster exists. Live with it. Deal with the monster, and stop wasting valuable screen time on trying to add a dose of reality to something which is fundamentally escapism. Really gets
there is a lot of exposition in an attempt to explain what's going on and ground it in some sense of reality. So, for example, the idea is that these monsters lived millions of years ago, when the Earth was more radioactive, and they eat radiation, and that's why the radiation levels dropped, and then they went into hibernation when there was no longer enough radiation on the surface, and they were sort of dug deeper underground to stay near the radiation. I mean, you're thinking, it's still a giant 350-foot tall monster. And also the monsters, not Godzilla, but the other monsters, their design is so anthropomorphically unlikely. They think, that looks cool.
Oh, come on, Steve. It's a bloody film about a 350-foot monster. Just leave it alone.
I didn't like the look at them. It looks silly to me.
But isn't that the problem with all kind of monster movies, which is particularly these kind of kaiju movies, which is you can trace them back to a lot of the fan base, like, the original Godzilla. They like the idea of some kind of message behind it. But most people, they just like the kind of man in suit and, as Ed says, the Mothra kind of element to it, which is just someone's doodled this whilst drunk, and then someone's decided to, make some kind of weird kind of lycra costume for a bloke to smash through giant cardboard skyscrapers.
I mean,
there is a definite element to that. Yeah. Ultimately, sometimes I just want escapism. Please don't try and make the life that I live every day somehow relevant to a giant bloody monster. Just stop it. If anyone's listening.
Yeah, but it can go too far the other way. I mean, just think Transformers. I mean, it can go too far, Ed.
I don't know. Do remember, Phil, that obviously I still drink. So I'm quite able to go to Transformers with the edge taken off, shall we say. And I'll just let that happen. I mean, let's face it, anything with the words Michael and Bay in it, I just kind of tend to let that happen to me. If you like, I'm very much just a passenger in that. So yeah, I'm not so bothered.
One of the things I picked up on, Steve, obviously I haven't seen this yet, is that obviously the director's past film was called Monsters, but it was more about the relationships that were going on at the time that something was happening. Some major thing, i.e. with monsters, but you didn't actually see the monsters.
Well, you saw them in the sort of backgrounds. Yeah, there was very
exactly,
much
but it was very much about the relationships and so on. And this is the approach that he's taken with this film, and this seems to be where it's splitting people down the middle, because I've read a lot of comments saying, well, when the Godzilla's on screen, it's absolutely brilliant. When he's not on screen, the acting's terrible and the story doesn't hold up.
Oh, yeah, I don't understand why everyone keeps saying the acting's terrible. I didn't think the acting was terrible at all. I didn't think that Aaron Taylor-Johnson was bad in the lead role. It's a fairly, he's playing an everyman role. It's not a very flashy. It doesn't require a flashy performance. Elizabeth Olsen was also quite good. I don't think I actually found the bits with the human beings to be the bits I found interesting. And as soon as the monsters turned up, I got a bit bored. I just wasn't interested. But some of the set pieces, there's the bit when they all halo jump. A group of Marines out of a plane from 30,000 feet down into a semi-destroyed San Francisco to defuse a bomb. That was really exciting. It's the bit that it was used extensively in the teaser trailer, and it looks really cool. And more of that was good. And then it gets to just two massive monsters leveling half a city. I just got bored. I didn't care about them. At least suppose you could say that Godzilla was a benign presence in the film. He was kind of the hero. And he had a purpose, which is that he hunts down and kills these monsters. That's what he does. He's a predator, effectively, of giant monsters. I think Gareth Edwards has done a very good job. He's done the best job he could have, I think, under the circumstances. I mean, given that it's a big budget studio movie, there's going to be a lot of interference from above. For a guy who's coming off the back of a $250,000, micro budget film that's been a bit of a hit, to move into that environment and succeed is all credit to Gareth Edwards for being able to do that at all. To maintain some of the humanity, great. to make a film that's faithful to the originals and will keep the fanboys and the fans of Godzilla happy again. Well done. It's also got some quite knowing nods to the films in there as well. So all in all, I think it's quite successful. Clearly, it's been successful in terms of box office, which is going to be good news for Warner Brothers. But I just ultimately don't really care about giant monsters.
What about the Rancor?
Rancor. Let's not get started on Jedi because I'll need to be ranting for an hour if we do that.
Rancor's
like the
comparative.
Rancor?
They're comparative.
I don't like Jedi. End of story. It's rubbish. So knees up at the Muppets, glove puppet Rancor, then a bunch of teddy bears turn up. I mean, if it isn't for the speeder bike chase and the lightsaber duel at the end, it wouldn't be worth watching at all.
But I bet when you saw that the first time, you thought it was the best thing you ever saw because you were a child. Because you were a child and you used your imagination, not 40 something.
So I was too old for it. I thought it was bollocks. I always have thought it was bollocks.
I thought it was the best thing since sliced bread when I was a child.
Yeah, but you're younger than me, so you'd have been an age group it was aimed at.
Steve's 67 years old.
Yeah,
he is. To show
he's turning into a right Victor Meldrew, isn't he?
Anyway, if you fancy watching possibly the loudest film I've ever seen in my entire life, by the way, it is unbelievably loud at times with some serious bass. You'd love it, Ed. Some mega bass moments.
Yeah, thanks. Pigeonhole me a bit more, why don't you?
I think it'll do well. Obviously, it is doing well, and I think people, as long as you don't go. Obviously, Kaz had built up a certain degree of expectation which wasn't fulfilled.
Oh Jesus Christ! Can you think what Chris is going to be like?
I don't know. Is Chris a Godzilla fan though? I don't know. Is that his cup of tea? I wouldn't say that was necessarily Chris's cup of tea. Actually, it doesn't involve any naked men, so that would like it.
I thought that was you. You do know that the Fast and Furious isn't real as well, Steve.
Yeah, but somehow I can justify a plane on a runway that's 48 miles long, isn't it, Ed? It goes on forever, but that doesn't bother me. It's just the giant monsters I've got an issue with. Well, the thing is, I liked the Godzilla from 1998 because the monster looked different.
You what?
Everyone hated it for that reason. I thought it was funny. They don't bother with exposition, as Ed just pointed out. They basically say nuclear tests by the French have mutated a lizard into a giant lizard. That's basically the premise. The French are the villains running around with the secret squad of, under Jean Reno. That's really funny. Yeah. They're going to piss out of the French. I'm up for a bit of that. I didn't mind the film. I thought it was okay.
I have to say that, I love that night, but it's all about context, isn't it? I was 1998. I was 17. I got to watch it. I was able to enthusiastically grope my then girlfriend most of the way through if I was bored. It had a charm. It did, and like most things to do with Roland Emmerich, it didn't take itself desperately seriously.
No, the US Army does more damage in the film than Godzilla does.
Well, the exposition was it was a shot of a lizard on a beach and a nuclear bomb going off in the background, and that was the explanation.
It didn't wrap itself up in the context. He just existed. He's come to Manhattan. He's literally gone all the way around the Cape of Good Hope, unless he's gone through.
No, he hasn't. Actually, he went through the Panama Canal.
Oh, he didn't he? He went over the Panama.
I watched it last week in preparation for this version of Godzilla.
Oh, you are right. God damn you! Yeah, but it got the whole. It just said he exists. Deal with it. Same with The Day After Tomorrow, which is, I have to admit, it's one of my wife and I guilty pleasure films. When the weather really turns shocking in sort of late autumn, early winter, we just watch it as a matter of course. And it's like, this big piece of the one piece of the ice shelf's gone, the entire weather system of the planet is going to turn to shit. Live with it and just go with it from there.
New York's going to instantly freeze.
Yeah.
But it's like the good old-fashioned superhero stories where just someone gets nuclear waste poured on them or something. And it's like, well, I've got a 50-50 chance of either dying or I'll get special powers.
Yeah. It doesn't concern itself unduly with that. And I this is the whole thing about films being escapism in a context thing. And when you confuse something which for me should be escapism with something which is then supposed to be gritty, I give up, if I'm honest.
But this is what virtually every film that has time travel involved falls down. You look at most criticism of like sci-fi is not when people are actually watching it, it's when people go out of the cinema and then they, like 2 hours later they actually say, hang on, that doesn't work.
Yeah,
but that's okay. Once you're out of the cinema, don't ask that question during the film, and you're all right. It's when you sit there in the film thinking, "Hang on, this is bollocks."
I would agree with that. If you can suspend disbelief whilst the lights are down and you're still eating some horrible sugary snack, it's done all it should do.
but you see, the sign of a really bad film is that you never think about it again after you walked out the door. At least with the ones that got big plot holes, you're actually still thinking about it.
Maybe, yeah.
I don't know, Phil, if I celebrate the fact that something calls me annoyance to mean that I regard that to be a good film. You and I might disagree on that. But...
Well, speaking of Transformers, there's a scene in Transformers 2 where they're at the Smithsonian. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's in Washington, D.C., isn't it? And they walk out the back and they're in a desert. And I was thinking, they're just insulting my intelligence at this point, aren't they? They're not even trying anymore. They don't care.
Again, I don't drink. Maybe this is why a lot of stuff just doesn't make any sense to me. Maybe you have to be inebriated in some way.
I'm not suggesting that you confront that particular demon again, but let's wait. I have an easier time with summer blockbusters than you do. Let's just leave it at that.
I just wish they'd be a bit more fun. I think one of the reasons I quite enjoyed Pacific Rim was because you're right, Ed. It was basically big dumb fun, and it didn't try to be anything else. There's been a real move in the last few years towards everything being realistic and dark. And I'm playing Christopher Nolan a lot for this, to be honest. The whole Dark Knight thing has really pushed everyone over the edge. I don't necessarily want to sit through a dark, boring, realistic film. I just want to be entertained for 2 hours. That's all.
Yeah,
so
do
you mean a film with hand puppets and Muppets? And I've got the perfect film for you.
No, I don't want that. I did a bit. Well, the effects are crap as well, aren't they? No, I mean, this summer, the film I'm looking forward to the most is The Guardians of the Galaxy, because that looks like it's going to be genuinely entertaining, and that's what I want: fun and exciting and well made.
Is that the one with the owls?
No. What? No, that's what is that called?
Something Guardians, isn't it?
It's the Legend of Guardian. Christ, what is that from?
Who's not doing their research now?
He's been there like a coiled spring.
Yeah.
Is it Legend of the Guardians, or was that the one that... Yes,
yeah, that was
there's two films. Legend of the Guardians, which is the one about the owls, and there was that film called Rise of the Guardians, which bombed for DreamWorks.
Didn't that have a lot of owls in it?
That's just
There's
what
no
I
owls
said.
in it.
Oh, okay. What's the owls in it with Guardians?
Legend of the Guardians.
Okay, fine.
Legend of the Guardians, the Owls of Ga'Hoole. In fact, I remember now, didn't Chris review that? He kept going, Ga'Hoole.
Yeah.
What were we talking about?
I don't
Godzilla.
know. We're rapidly...
Yeah, we're swiftly
definitely
running
left
out of
Godzilla
time. Yeah, so Godzilla score, Steve?
7. I mean, Castle's right on the score. I just don't think... I think he was just being a bit optimistic in terms of his expectations.
Yeah, but he's allowed to do that. Right, Blu-rays released next week. Go through them for us.
We got August, Osage County, worst title ever. Quite funny, but basically it's a stage play. I saw it at the cinema, it's a stage play originally, and it's very much like a stage play in terms of it's all pretty much in one location. But it's got a great cast, Julia Roberts, Meryl Streep, and it is quite funny in places. Frankenstein, Avoid Like the Plague, it's awful. Inside Llewyn Davis, that's the new film from the Coen brothers. I've got it on Blu-ray. I started watching it, got about halfway through and fell asleep, so I haven't actually finished seeing it yet.
That bodes really well.
Yeah, no. Well, I'm beginning to think that the Coen brothers are no longer laughing with me, but at me with some of their films. I don't really get them anymore. It wasn't that great. I didn't really get it, as typically with their films these days. And then also Jamaica Inn, which is the BBC miniseries that came out, was broadcast a few weeks ago and actually generated the most complaints in recent memory for the BBC, because no one could understand a word anyone was saying in it. Everyone was mumbling in their West Country accents.
To be honest, I did try, and I wanted to see what all the fuss was about, so I had a look at an episode on iPlayer. And I'm not joking, certain passages, it was like my centre speaker had been disconnected.
Yeah, no. I mean, I watched it, and I am from the West Country, and I couldn't understand what anyone was saying in it either. One particular character, Sean Harris's character, was mumbling the entirety of you. I sat there thinking, what did he just say?
Was he the one that literally sounded like Boomhauer in King of the Hill?
Yeah. Yes. So
it sounded a bit like Ted and Ralph from the Fast Show.
Speaking of the Fast Show,
expect one side the drainage is sorted in the lower field.
It's
Friday night.
Is it Friday night? Is it? I'm looking forward to that.
That'd be funny.
That should be really good. Ed, you picked up on something. We're going to mention the N word again.
I'm sorry, I've been stifling. I've actually now got the Twitter feed up, and it's absolute magnificence.
Right, okay, so we need to explain this first of all, so please explain it, and then we can go through some.
Right, okay. It would appear that an app for Netflix on a device, I don't know which device it is, but it's mixing up the synopses of different programs into one thing on the app description. So you just end up with the most surreal. For example, right at the top, there's a Twitter feed. Whether it's still going when the podcast comes out, it's called Summary Bug. It's the top one 35 minutes ago. This appetizing documentary follows world-renowned chef Farhan Adria as he plans and perfects a new menu from the long-ago sperm bank donations.
That's a documentary I'd actually go and see.
In this comprehensive cosmology series, Professor Stephen Hawking looks at the entire universe from the Big Bang to half-pint misfits. I mean, if this is happening by accident, it's truly magnificent.
Oh, there's a great one here. I mean, we know that Disney cartoons take some liberties, but this is brilliant. Inspired by Victor Hugo's novel, this Disney film follows a gentle, crippled bell ringer as he faces prejudice and tries to save the eyes of individual dinosaurs.
Legendary businessman and Apple co-founder Steve Jobs changed the way Americans live, think, and work before his extraterrestrial activity.
Actually, that one might be true.
Oh, this one's brilliant. Decades after the adventures of the Enterprise crew, Captain Jean-Luc Picard leads the new Enterprise on missions of trash talking and deceit.
As I say, if this is happening by accident, hats off to you, Netflix. Even when you're actually screwing up, it's still magnificent.
Oh, that is entertaining. That really is.
Correspondent Lisa Ling gains access into North Korea and gives viewers a rare glimpse inside one of the most boorish, idiotic monarchs. And that celebrity baker Buddy Valastro pushes contestants' baking skills to the limit for a $50,000 cash prize and a chance to work at harbouring a serial killer. So yes, if anyone can work out what Netflix app this bug is happening on, I'd be delighted to take a look for myself. But yeah, hats off to you guys.
So that address again for people to follow this, if they
summary. So as in news summary space bug. It's the Twitter feed that's running. I found it on a website called Us Versus Them, which is, if you like, a content aggregator. This is it's the Twitter feed that they've picked up on. It's got plenty of submissions. They still seem to be coming in. And yes, magnificent.
Oh, this is class. I'm going to be on this the rest of the night. I can just tell him.
So yes. Which is rather nixed, depressingly. I mean, I had a proper, serious film-related conversation topic to go on, but we've just run out of time.
Save that for another day, don't worry.
Yeah, we've unfortunately run out of time on the AVForums podcast for this week. So thank you very much for listening. It is appreciated. Please leave your feedback in the feedback area under this podcast on avforums.com, or you can send us an email to podcast@avforums.com, or if you're on iTunes, leave us a rating, please, and why not say what you think about the podcast, as long as it's good, remember. So that's it for this week. My thanks to Steve Withers.
What's after Cable Junction? The Atlantic, then Ireland.
Mark Botwright.
You're too damn drunk.
And Ed Selley.
What the hell's a 908? I've never heard of a 908.
Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook, bookmark avforums.com for the latest reviews, news and video, and of course, like I say, leave us a rating on iTunes if you enjoyed the show. I'm Phil Hinton, thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you again next week.